Hello, I'm Hamish Erskine and I'm a plumber in Exeter. This video is part 2 of one that I made last week entitled Problems with Bristan Easyfit Kitchen Taps. Part 1 was primarily for the benefit of my 21 Easyfit customers to explain why their kitchen taps pose a serious flood risk to their properties. I then emailed them asking them to firstly watch the video and secondly to call Bristan's customer services requesting a replacement tap under the guarantee. Unfortunately, one of those customers emailed me right back to say, and I quote, "We had ours replaced by the insurance plumber about 6 months ago when it flooded the kitchen." Oh dear. So in fact, it's now 4 out of 21 that have failed, not 3, and one of them actually did do some serious damage and was an insurance job. As I explained in the first video, the idea of the Easyfit taps is that in future years, changing a kitchen tap won't involve lying on your back under a kitchen sink with water dripping in your face from the disconnected waste pipe. However, as a plumber, the most awkward and uncomfortable position you can find yourself in is when you flood a customer's house. I'd rather be on my back under a sink with water dripping in my face any day. It's now the 17th of September 2016 and Bristan have kindly started making appointments with my customers for their engineers to do the replacements. I don't know when they will do a general recall for everyone else with these taps. It's surprising really, because this week I found a thread entitled Bristan Easyfit Taps on the UK Plumbers Forum. It was started by a plumber called Ed on the 19th of January 2015. Someone had told him that these Easyfit taps were blowing and he was worried about one that he'd fitted for one of his customers. The next day he posted saying, "Going to call or email Bristan, see what their response is and if they've had any incidents reported to them." Later that day he posted, and I quote, "First they know of this happening," after a long pause, talking to someone else. There you have it. Bristan have known about this problem since at least the 20th of January 2015. That's a whole year and 8 months ago. What I find amazing is that they're still flogging these taps like nobody's business. On 3rd of October 2015, a plumber called Jackie posted, "I fitted a set 6 months ago and they blew off yesterday. Both grub screws had loosened." On 5th October she posted, "I spoke to Bristan today and they admitted problems with Easyfit." So how is it that when I spoke to Bristan on 2nd of August 2016, they told me all the problems they had investigated were due to installer error? In other words, it was the plumber's fault. Now that's what I call somebody having a laugh. Just blame it on the plumber. Now when I say somebody, I don't mean the guy or the girl in customer services that answered the phone. On any given issue, they just say what their line manager tells them to say. And the line manager tells them to say what her manager has said is company policy. And so on, up and up, until you get to the man at the top. No one can say what they really think, except the man at the top. He's the one having the laugh. And he's the one getting a nice bonus every year when they sell lots of these dodgy taps. It's one of the things I like about being a sole trader plumber. Although people think you're like the guy at the bottom just trying to make an honest living fixing taps and toilets, the reality is you're the guy at the top, because there's no one above you to tell you what you can or can't say. And if you're the guy at the top, you can speak to another guy at the top on a level playing field. Now Bristan's guy at the top has been having a laugh with these taps. So now it's my turn to have a laugh. One of the questions I posed last week was this: is the design flaw in the base or is it in the tap? On 1st October 2015, a plumber called Croft had this to say: "One of our installers, who has fitted a fair few kitchen taps, had one fly off within 5 minutes of leaving the customer's property. Tap initially held perfectly fine under mains pressure. Grub screws must have unwound themselves under the pressure, as I could see the marks on the metal where he had got the grub screws very tight initially. Major design issues. The first and last Easyfit tap we will fit. The design flaw, on seeing the tap myself, is that the fixing grub screws locate into a beveled section of the tap. I think he actually means the base. High water pressure pushes the tap upwards, causing the grub screws to start to unwind as they move up the beveled section. Simply changing the design to a milled slot for the grub screws to recess into would sort this issue entirely. Let's try to understand what Plumber Croft is telling us here. Firstly, he's explaining why the grub screws come loose, and then at the end he proposes his fix for this problem. However, these are issues of engineering design, and me and Croft are just plumbers. What do plumbers know? So I've called in an expert who has a degree from Bristol University in mechanical engineering, and he knows a thing or two about engineering design. I'm going to turn you over to him and let him explain things to you. Now, this isn't just any old expert, but someone I grew up with. Now, he's always been smarter than me and always the more handsome of the two of us. But if you were just listening to us talk, you might not be able to tell us apart. Well, thank you for welcoming me, and I feel honoured, Hamish, that you've sought my insight into this problem. Whenever you have an interface involving a fluid like water, you have to think about two things. Firstly, how is the interface watertight? And secondly, how is it secure so that it cannot come apart under pressure? Let's backtrack again to the more common tap design that you showed us last time, Hamish. On this one, between the flexible pipe tails and the tap, there is only one interface because these screw directly into the tap. Now, this interface is made secure by the thread, and it's made watertight by the O-ring. And the O-ring keeps it watertight even if that thread isn't absolutely tight. So you actually only have to turn this hand tight into the tap. Now, once that's screwed into the tap and hand tight, this interface is never going to come undone because, for one thing, the tap is held securely by the horseshoe clamp and back nut, so it's fixed to the sink, so that can't turn. And the other end of this flexi is held secure to the copper pipe, so that can't turn. So this is never going to come undone. And even if it's not absolutely tight in the first place, the O-ring keeps it watertight. So consequently, this is a tried and tested design. Let's look again at the Easyfit design. The flexible tails attach to the base in exactly the same manner as in the previous tap. So no difference there. And the base now, not the tap, but the base is secured to the kitchen work surface by this bit here. This is the equivalent of the horseshoe clamp. Now, in this case, instead of there being a thread here and you tightening it from below by a back nut, now the thread is on this part and you tighten it from above using an Allen key. But essentially, there's nothing very new in that so far, in the way that these connect to the base and this clamps to the kitchen work surface. Then we have a second interface between the base and the tap. This is a new interface which wasn't present in the original design. Now, this interface is made watertight by the O-rings, and notice actually in this case there are now two O-rings, so if one of those fails you've got a backup. That's actually quite a nice touch. The problem in this is, how is it made secure so that this interface doesn't come apart? After tightening the base to the kitchen sink, you then fit the tap onto the base. Firstly, there's a circular flange that goes on there, and then you push the tap. Having first greased the nipples here, you push the tap down onto the base. You then do up the grub screws with an Allen key, and you put the long end in and you tighten it with the short end, and do the other side as well. Now that flange there, now this flange, actually, I'll tell you what this is for, that has another rubber O-ring in it, and the purpose of this is if there's any water that splashes around the base of the tap, then this O-ring on that flange stops the water getting through and into the cupboard under the kitchen sink. Anyway, so that's not quite tight. This tap still is not really tight down onto the base yet. I've got to do up these grub screws quite tight. I put the short end in now, and I do these up about another full turn, it says in the instructions, pretty tight. And that is now nice and tight onto the base, and there's no way I can turn that flange. The action of tightening those screws has forced the tap tight down onto the base. Now let's take this apart and see how it works that tightening that grub screw forces the tap down tight onto the base. Now that I've taken it apart again, you can see that as I tighten the grub screw, it presses against this beveled surface, and you can perhaps see the indentation that the grub screw has made on that beveled surface. As the beveled surface presses against the grub screw, it exerts a force perpendicular to the bevel. That is, in this direction. Now, force is a vector quantity. Thinking back to GCSE mathematics, a vector can be resolved into horizontal and vertical components. As you tighten the grub screw, the vertical component of the force forces the grub screw, and hence the tap it's attached to, downwards onto the base until it's nice and tight. That's the purpose of that bevel. Also, what Plumber Croft is trying to say is that water pressure tries to push the tap upwards. And Newton's third law of physics tells us that to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So the more the water pressure pushes up on the tap, the bigger the vertical component must be pushing down on the grub screw. Unfortunately, they seem to have forgotten that as well as there being a vertical component of that force, there's also a horizontal component. The horizontal component wants to force the grub screw outwards, giving it a tendency to unwind. The bigger the vertical component, the bigger the horizontal component. And there's nothing in the design of the grub hole in the tap other than friction to stop this unwinding. Because of friction, this grub screw is not going to shoot out immediately. But every time you use the tap, turning it on and off, you put a small but repetitive stress on that grub screw. You do that in two ways. Firstly, you touch the tap, and there's a bit of leverage then on this interface between the base and the tap. Secondly, the dynamic water pressure when the tap is turned on is less than static mains pressure when you turn it off. So every time you turn the tap off, the pressure increase gives this grub screw a little nudge. Bit by bit, it unwinds until your interface is watertight because of those O-rings, but has nothing securing it to the base. At that point, it's like the cork in a champagne bottle. If you take away the securing metal thingamy that secures the cork, then you've got pressure underneath that cork from the champagne, and the cork doesn't need much of a nudge before it pops. Now, when these taps pop, it's usually when they're being used, because the tap is being given a slight nudge. But in some cases, these will pop when no one's touching them except the mains water pressure. So you could be away on holiday, relaxing by the pool, only to find that when you come home, you have your very own indoor swimming pool. Hamish, you were wondering about which models of these taps are affected. Clearly there is a flaw in the base because they've forgotten about the horizontal component of force on that grub screw. And there's a flaw in the tap because there's nothing in the design of that threaded hole to stop the grub screw unwinding. One plumber on the forum suggests that Bristan should have included a tube of Loctite in the box of every Easyfit tap, and that a drop of Loctite on each of the grub screws would have sufficed. In my opinion, that might have helped, but I still wouldn't trust it enough to risk flooding my home. Loctite doesn't overcome the problem of that horizontal force, component of force, that they've forgotten about. Plumber Croft suggested that instead of having a beveled section on the base, you simply have a flat section with a hole milled into it for the grub screw to screw into. Without the bevel, you wouldn't have a horizontal component tending to unwind the grub screws. But neither would you have the vertical component that gradually tightens the tap down onto the base as you tighten the grub screws. Unfortunately, Croft's solution wouldn't work. This Easyfit interface between the base and the tap needs a bigger redesign than just removing the bevel. In part 3, we'll look at a redesign that might actually work. Now, the speed at which these taps pop may vary from model to model. The size of the nudge on the grub screws may vary according to the height and design of the tap. The higher the tap, the more leverage there is on the interface. So if the echoes start popping after about a year, say, perhaps a lower design like the cinnamon will take 2 or 3 years. Who knows? But the main flaw is in the base, and since all Easyfit models share a common base, all models in the Easyfit range will be affected, even if some to a lesser degree. There's no doubt in my mind that all Easyfit models with this design of base need to be recalled as a matter of urgency. Clearly, Bristan won't have enough of their own engineers to recall all of these themselves. Over the next few months, they will need the help of every plumber like you, Hamish, up and down the country to get these taps out of people's houses before they blow, and to get Bristan out of the hole that they've dug themselves into. Really, Hamish, it's all down to GCSE maths. I'd give this design a grade C. It's definitely not an A or an A star. And I see on the Bristan website that Jeremy Ling, the CEO, promises to deliver an extraordinary customer experience and to make life easier for customers. I'd say, Hamish, that it's time for Jeremy to deliver. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I'll now hand you back to Hamish, and I'll see you again in part 3. GCSE maths, Newtonian physics. I could have never figured all that out on my own. I told you he was always smarter than me. You see, when I did my plumbing MVQ, I got a level 2. But when he did his engineering degree, he got a 2-1. It's that blooming 1 that makes all the difference. And he wasn't even happy with it. He wanted a first. It's funny the way that works. A first is better than a 2. Now, I don't know why it bothers him, as he's done fine with a 2-1. I do wish, though, that in my MVQ I'd got a level 1. It would have been nice to outsmart him in something. Now he's gone out the room, and I don't think he can hear me. I call him Bertie, but then I can get away with it. To you, he's Albert Erskine. I'll tell you something else though. You know what Plumber Croft said about the taps? It made a lot more sense to me than what Bertie said. Sad thing is, when a plumber like me or Croft says something, no one listens. But they do when Bertie says it. I've never figured that out. I guess it's just a gift or something you're born with, or you ain't. He's a dear though, Bertie. I do my plumbing, Bertie does my website, my marketing, he got me to #1 on Google, he does my accounts, my tax return, and he'll be editing this video in a minute. He does it all. Everything, except getting his hands dirty. I'll be lost without Bertie. Well, that's all for now, folks. If you want to watch more of my videos, go to YouTube and search for Hamish Erskine. Erskine is another good Scottish name, but south of the border, not everyone knows how to spell it. It begins and ends with an E, just like Hamish begins and ends with an H. If you ever find yourself in Scotland, heading out of Glasgow towards Loch Lomond, you'll drive over the Erskine Bridge. I don't know quite why it's called that. Bertie, did you build it? Oh, he's shaking his head. Anyway, Erskine is a famous name, and if you're into tennis, before she married, Andrew Murray's mum was an Erskine. Of course, instead of searching YouTube for Hamish Erskine, you could just search for Hamish the Plumber, or even Hamish and Bertie. And if you don't want to leave the ball in your court, why not subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you'll be notified whenever I publish a new one. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again in part 3.